So I think I have the phone set so that an incoming call won't throw us offline. Hopefully you guys can catch the live stream. If not, I'll have the recording up after this on the YouTube channel. As always, for those of you who have not done so, go ahead and subscribe to Herd Watching on YouTube. We also have a Twitter, all the normal places. And also Riding Herd, RIDINGHERD. We have that on Twitter. We have it on Facebook, and so on and so forth. So what I wanted to talk about right now was sort of during this time with coronavirus and everybody, social distancing and staying in place and all the rest of this, we're seeing a lot of not quite gloating, though gloating would not be completely inaccurate, but we're seeing a lot of push from the left that's talking about how what we need now is socialized medicine as sort of a bulwark and a hedge against outbreaks of this type, and that somehow or another a centralized medical authority would be the right answer. And I find that completely interesting on any number of levels. So let's unpack a couple of those. Let's pretend for a moment that the fantasy is real, that somehow centralized medical authority and single payer and all these systems, whether it be the sort of hideously broken system you have in England or the problems you have with the Canadian system, or the sort of nightmares that you see in places like Spain and so on. Pretend for a moment that was not quite all there was to it, and that in some fantasy alternate universe, centralizing the authority for all medical decisions in the nation in the apparatus of the government was not inherently broken. So let's pretend for a moment that it actually operated well. I still find it amazing that people would want to do it. So now, because the same people are claiming that what we need to do is make sure we centralize the authority and the allocation of funds and the allocation of resources in the embodiment of the federal government, and eventually they would want it to be in the UN, but in the federal government, are the same people who claim that our federal government is currently in the grips of a racist tyrant who would cheerfully kill a good percentage of the population that annoys him. And this is the fundamental dichotomy of the left, that they're going to constantly scream about how horrible, oppressive, and misguided the institutions that govern their lives are. In other words, they want to be, the police are racist and the government is racist and the whole society is in the grips of the white male patriarchy. So all the systems above them are corrupt in their mind, and yet they insist that the answer is to grant those systems more and more and more power over their daily lives. And they can hold these worldviews simultaneously. And I find that fascinating. You very rarely see like a Bernie bot who's like, well, yes, I'd love to centralize all power within the government, but, that's 10 years from now after we've, no, it's why most of the real believers in this silliness harbor this sort of internal fantasy of a violent overthrow of the democratic system, because it's inevitable, right? You cannot want to centralize power within the government and then leave the decision about who's going to be wielding that power to people you don't potentially agree with. You must enforce ideological purity so that you can make sure that once you centralize power, your team is the only team that will ever be able to wield that power. Anyway, so I'm just saying, like in the weaker case, I find it absolutely amazing that the same morons on CNN who will yell and scream about how evil Donald Trump is are also going to simultaneously insist that all power for medical decisions lie within the same corrupt institution of the federal government, led by the same guy they think is fundamentally evil. So on that level, I find the whole thing fascinatingly broken. But then there's the triumph of the private sector. Now, it is unquestionable when you look at the reality that all the medical innovation that matters in the world, the vast majority that comes from the private sector as practiced within those nations that still has a thriving capitalist drive around medical advancement. So, the treatments, the machines, the drugs, most of what is used by the sort of parasitic, central planned medical communities comes from America, comes from, the other nations that still have a free market for medical advancement, because it's simply too expensive, too difficult, and too complicated to do this stuff at the level we're at now, particularly with, targeted DNA, individualized, look, the idea of taking someone's DNA, sequencing it, creating a specific cancer treatment for their specific cancer, turning that around in time to matter and giving it to someone on an individual basis is not the idea that you come up with if you're on the central planning committee of, the National Health System of England. Yes, once some American company invents that technology, it's perfectly in keeping for a parasitic organization like the NHS to take it from them and force them to supply it for $1 or whatever it is they do. But the creation of those ideas, this is like in everything else, this only comes from the large-scale application of the synergistic work of a large number of incredibly smart people acting in simultaneously cooperation and competition with each other. And the only system where you find that is capitalism. Capitalism is, for all intents and purposes, a distributed expert system where individuals are the nodes, and that system, without any central planning, seeks optimized solutions to problems. That's what capitalism is. That's why capitalism works as well as it does. And in this case, for all the whining about, there was a little bit of a delay in getting the initial coronavirus test kits together, we are now, let's not forget that it's only been a couple weeks. We are testing more people than most other places are as a whole. Our tests are faster, more accurate, and made more cheaply available than they are pretty much anywhere else. We are well on our way to a vaccine in a time frame that is amazing, even allowing for the fact that everybody has the same information available to them. Okay, so, the Chinese government, one of the few things they did that was reasonable was they released the sequence that they had for the coronavirus. So everybody kind of came at it from the beginning. And I guarantee you that an effective treatment and or an effective vaccine is not coming from the NHS. It's not coming from, the government panel on national whatever. No, it's coming from the private sector. It's coming from, the hundreds of American companies who are finding faster ways to synthesize this, from the simultaneous tracks of work that they're working on with more than a dozen versions of the vaccine. It's coming from, all these companies who know that A, they're going to be able to help people, but B, the company that figures this out is going to do very well for itself. That there's the opportunity of a lifetime here to make just a pile of cash. And that's not a bad thing. That's a fine incentive. If some company shows up and can save hundreds of thousands and millions of lives, I have no problem if the person or the small team responsible for that never has to work another day in their lives. Is that not reasonable? Is not their lifespan, the rest of their lifetime potentially lived in leisure, a reasonable payment for what they would have done to save more than that? If they can add, let's say that a vaccine for corona saves 100,000 lives. Let's say it added 1 year to the lives of 100,000 people. That's 100,000 years of human life now left in the world. The person or the team who invented Corona, let's say there were 100 people involved in that. That 100 people might live 100 years. So 100, so what, 10,000 years or something, and they will have saved, 400,000 years of people or whatever it is, 10,000, 100,000. My point is, like, if you do the math just on the human life saved, if those people never had to do anything else for the rest of their lives but stay home and eat marshmallow peeps they dip in chocolate, like, who cares? That's not profiteering even. It's cheap. It's cheap at any price. But anyway, so when you mobilize, like we have done in this nation, the output of a free market system that has attracted a unique concentration of innovators, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, all these people are turning their attention to this problem. You never had that in the Soviet Union. You never had that in those sort of oppressive regimes. You certainly don't have it in England. You don't have that same sort of output in Canada. You just don't. There's a reason why the NHS doesn't invent anything, and why the Canadian healthcare system doesn't really invent anything, and why you don't hear these inventions coming out of the nationalized healthcare systems in Europe. It's always those agencies exist only to manage and ration the innovations that come out of companies and groups that are not under the grinding boot of that sort of centralized control. And if these people get their way and that sort of centralized control is everywhere, then there will be nothing left for the parasites to live off of. They won't be there economically. It won't be there innovation-wise. It won't be there. There's a reason why China, for all the power that it can bring to bear, has not solved the Wuhan problem the way we're going to solve it. And this is the thing that the left truly, truly fears. This, they think, is their moment where they get to stand up and tell everybody, this would have never happened under a centralized government system. And the answer is, it is happening all across the world to centralized government systems. So don't give me that idiocy. But more than that, they need this thing to really wipe out a lot of people. They need this to be super bad so that it scares people, and then they need to lay it all at Trump's door. This is why they're fighting so hard against the testing of the malaria drug with a couple of additives as a potential treatment, effective palliative treatment for corona, because the last thing in the world these people need is for them to have spent all this time whipping us up into a frenzy, for them to have spent all this time and then Donald Trump to come out and go, hey, by the way, we've gotten some good results out of this drug. I think there's something here worth looking at. We're going to aggressively pursue it. And they spend all that time telling us that that's not the answer. And then if it works, Donald Trump should get his name on every one of those little pills and make these people literally swallow him being right to save their lives. If Trump pulls this off, if the capitalist private industry, private medical and private industrial base that is America rises to this challenge, which it looks like we're going to do, and crushes this the way it looks like we are going to do, there will be nothing left more for the Bernie people to point at and scream at, because it will not have been the NHS in England that did this. While the NHS is already deciding who they're going to murder, while the New York state government has a big, thick document justifying why it is they're going to let you die in the hallway because they didn't bother buying enough ventilators. That's all going to fall by the wayside, and it's going to turn out that private industry rose to that. And when that happens, Donald Trump will be completely vindicated, and they are terrified of that. They would rather see 300,000 or 400,000 Americans die than Donald Trump solve this problem. And for all that you'll see the talking heads on CNN pretend that that's not true, look at their eyes and look at their body language. Look at the glee. I've spoken this before. Look at the joy and glee and energy with which they speak of everything bad. And look at the way they have to literally choke down the bile on any piece of good news they have. And if it turns out that this drug is actually essentially a cure, you will see them sadder than you have seen them at any time since Hillary Clinton tested negative for the presidency. All right. We are going to get back on here later on tonight, probably. I was having a great conversation with a good friend of mine, and we got on the topic of does humanity tend to throw the right person up at the right moment in history? And why is it that that seems to be true? Why is it that Donald Trump is the right guy for this moment? Why is it that Winston Churchill arose at just the right time? And then on the negative, why is it that, your Stalins arrive right when they can do what they can do? Because these people are anomalies, and they always seem to arrive right when the ground is perfect for their seed to land. And why is that? Is that just chance, or is there something about the way societies work that make that happen? Anyway, we're going to talk about that another time. I just wanted to talk about essentially capitalism and Corona, and we'll be back another time. Take it easy, guys.